Folks, don't give up. We'll get the speed here, the tempo. See, I'm only, I don't know, 50 behind now. Not counting tonight. This is from 2 nights ago. 2 nights, 1 night. Ready? Well, hell, we got 10 minutes. I'll get them. All right, our first contestant on tonight's amateur part is me. And for those of you, again, right quick, in places that this is on cable, surely it's not on anything but cable. But some of you, I find out, are not seeing the whole hour's worth that we've been taping since we started this. In the first half, more or less, is taken up by what's known as the Kyroots stuff papers. So a bunch of little stories and little one-liners and proverbs and whatever you like to call it that we have been doing. And we have started now, from those who are here in person, sending up little notes asking if I would care to make an additional comment on these, since I know Kyroot well enough that I can probably say something. And so that's what we're doing. And I'm going to look back, and we're 2 nights behind, but here we go. Are you ready? Faster. That's the key word, right? Well, you got to admit, we're going somewhere. For years I refused to even comment on them. And now we're at the point that that's all we do. By the way, if you request it, and I write down, if nothing else, I think I'm going to reread it, but there are going to be a few that I may just refrain from making a comment. You just have, well, that is a comment. If I agree that I'll try to make some comment, and I read it again, and I don't, that is a comment. Well, we did that one. Well, last week, the last time. See, we're not as far behind as you thought. Is this what DeForest or Sarnoff or where it was had in mind for television to be? All right, and Kyroots said, compared to local change, which common sense and observation tells you must be fed by the elements and activities involved, universal growth and change seems to not be nourished at all and is further, thus rendered invisible to ordinary sight. This is based upon Kyroots that have been out several times at different forms that growth is universal, and then what seems to be anything other than growth, stagnation, problems, anomalies, everything that man considers to be, would fall within a debit column in the grand bookkeeping of life, would be local. This says, compared to local change, which common sense and observation tells you must be fed by the elements and activities involved. That is, when you look around and what appears to be change, such as if a person says, I have changed because, as you know, I used to drink pretty heavily, but since I wrecked my car and killed my wife and child, I want you to know, by God, praise be to somebody. Karen, Horney, Freud, AA, Jesus, I have quit drinking. Now, regardless, ordinary people say applause, applause, the man, but it was fed. No problem. If he lives in our neighborhood, I'm sure that you're glad he quit drinking. At least he do severe damage to you physically or your automobile. But what seems to be changed on a local level is always fed. Always. That there is something nourishing what seems to be the change. It can be not just individual, it could be what appears to be political change. What's been taking place for the last several years in Eastern Europe. The downfalls of certain political systems, economic systems. But you can always, because of the secondary world, you can always look, somebody will do it for you, some commentator will write and say, well, now here, at least from one view or at least from one opinion, here is the kind of thing that helped bring about the downfall of the communist regime in Bulgaria. And on a slightly different level, a different kind of sense, there's some similarity, but a little bit different, in Romania. And you can start taking notes, you can start thinking what you kept up with history, and it seems to be fed. There is what Kyroots been insinuating, that real growth is universal. And when it's universal, it begins to reach such a level. Universal growth and change seems not to be nourished at all. Now that is what, well, in the last line, and is further thus rendered invisible to ordinary sight. It is from that springs such grand and glorious ideas as conspiracies, and for those of you that like it another way, religion. Same thing. The belief that there is something going on that we can't explain. But people put an immediate comma after that. We can't explain it, but it can be explained. It's a conspiracy, or else it's the work of great forces that we can never understand. And all they're pointing out is it's growth. It is real change. But it's on such a level that cannot be seen by ordinary sight. Thank you. 41 down. All we got to do is get the tempo. Maybe if I had JV's drummer here. We had I think we've got two new that if we ever had an official holiday, two new favorites that have Jane read the 7 laws of the revolution. And then maybe have Tim reading the one about the guy that wrote the letter about his bones aching when he moved, and his sight failing, his weight dropping, and that in all sincerity, well, you know the one, that he was having to now look upon the whole prospect of death with a certain kind of relief. P.S. All right. And Kyroots said, well, he moved over to the kitchen corner and played a quiz game. And it's supposed to be a conversation. It's two different people. Okay, children, what exists yet doesn't exist? Oh, I know, cried out little Nipper. The revolution. And Kyroots said, yes, that's right. But so does everything else. You want me to do it again? You see, that's the sort of thing that if you're turning the kite loose of your own mind, but now you've been around us, beating me and Kyroots using the term the neural revolution, that sir just has something to call it other than a peanut butter sandwich. Okay, children, what exists yet doesn't exist? And what would be more expected than a child? Then what would be more expected in this kind of context? What exists yet doesn't exist? What would be more expected than to have one of the children supposedly say, oh, I know, the revolution. Yeah. Except Kyroots points out, yeah, that's true. But so does everything else around here. That is the secondary world. That it exists, and yet it doesn't exist. But now you surely understand that. All right, you say it exists. But when someone has a conflicting opinion, when there is the kind of polarized based energy that runs everything on the secondary level here, then somebody else is going to say, no, no, no. Now, it may appear to come out on the basis of some sense of morality or scientific argument about truth as opposed to error, but they're still saying that what you're saying doesn't exist. And so everything exists, and yet it doesn't exist. If it's in the secondary world. The primary world, you can look at another way, is either not quite that precise, or is so precise that you don't want to think about it. That's when all you can do is say, P.S., have you heard JB's new album? Because there's nothing else to say. And Kyroots said, real change is not anecdotal. I'm tempted not to say anything, but here I go. Local, what's known as local change, such as someone quits drinking, someone does anything, someone changes religion, someone gets a nose job, someone changes their wife or husband. What they call change is always anecdotal. Always. How else do they know they changed? Huh? Well, you can look at it another way if you want to. Pulling a Kyroots from tonight that I know is obvious. A civilized world is a talking world. A secondary world is a talking world. if a person changes in the ordinary sense, and the change is not anecdotal, that is, that they do not tell someone, at the very least, and this won't hardly do with most people, they'll stop a goddamn stranger on the street and say, I bet you're wondering why I look so much better than last time you saw me. I've quit drinking. Or become, I guess, just an instant part-time Catholic run into confession and say, Father, what do you call him? Hey, I quit drinking. It has to be anecdotal. That is local change. And it's not just being funny, of course, because it has to be talked about. In a sense, it is not real change, and so it must be talked about to become part of the secondary scenario, to play along, to fulfill its part in the stream of things. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, all right. I'll read it. One guy in Kyroots said, one guy thought, drugs are to Mary as Mary is the lamb. If that be true, one lamb said, I'll scram. Now, those of you out in TV land, or people who may have a rational brain, Kyroot has for a while used different, it's kind of a expansion to try and distract you, to fool you, mislead you, trick you, help ruin your life on the basis of the electrochemical operations that run the human brain. And those of you out there that are drinking and taking drugs or religious or tuned in the wrong channel, thought this was nude book reviews or whatever. Instead of just the electrochemical processes, Kyroots has been insinuating for those that has got any semblance of any intelligence in the 1990s, that is what everyone else has always called their soul, their spirit, their psyche, and anything else is this. You can call it anything you want to, and you can shave it. You can try and put a fake mustache, put a few mutton chops on it. That's it. And at times, Kyroots has then referred to the goo field, which I think Kyroots normally means that's more of an area that is yet to be touched in the brain, which is what the revolution is about. The goo field and these lightning storms. I think in some other times it's even been referred to as some kind of unusual experience, mystical experience and all that, and it's simply the mind being fired up into areas that is not necessary now. And you may well ask, well, what areas are necessary and not necessary? Well, you may ask, since I put words in your mouth. Whatever you're thinking now is all that's necessary for you, and anything else is not necessary. Which I always find interesting to say such as that and someone write it down on a note. Like, what do you mean? And then as things have moved along and gotten closer to warmer weather, Kyroots even began referring to, if you remember the little, Mary had a little lamb. You kind of fill in the rest. It has, I'm suggesting, some connection between the electrochemical processes running the brain, the goo fields and the electrical storms, the lightning, and Mary and the lamb. And it has something to do, I might suggest, on a wider level between what we've been calling the primary and the secondary world. Okay? That Mary represents one aspect of that, and the lamb represents some aspect. I don't want to try to guess which one. So this one guy thought drugs are to Mary, some part, as Mary is to the lamb. And one lamb, when he heard that, thought about it and thought, if that's true, I think I'm going to split. Of course, under ordinary conditions, if something similar to that happened, and it does happen, which I'm not going to try to describe since I'm about to go on to the next page, that is not what would happen. Is that part of the mind that is represented, I suggest to you, by the lamb here? The lamb would not split. The lamb would say, give me some more dope. Give me another drink. That's all you can do. No, you can say, give me another drink and I'll tell you a good story. I'll be anecdotal. All right, and Kyroots said, the true impact of historical events is always after the fact, in that what occurred was collective and generational, not immediate and individual. Tempted not to say anything. What appears to be historical events is always of a sequential level. It's always, we're talking about the secondary world, because there really is no primary history. there is. You can go, for instance, and you can see the aftermath, let us say, of what Vesuvius did to certain of those poor Romans. You can see the results of something more of a primary level. But it is, when it seems to be history, when man's ordinary mind begins to weave a tale about, well, look, let us consider what sociologically, historically, the impact of that great tragedy of Vesuvius or Pompeii wiping out parts of the Roman Empire. Let us consider, and then I can make it up, but surely you can. I can't make up everything. I don't have time. I can make it up. But start making up something about this seemed to bring about a certain kind of more cohesive movement toward the area wherein man's intellect was beginning to catch up with his baser instincts, and agriculture had to move again from the cities, and blah. It, from a secondary level, can apparently be of some importance. But then if you take a very hard-nosed, objective, impartial view of history, with no offense, it's a nice hobby. But anyone who has any ability, any potential ought to be a revolutionist. A man tonight in the Kyroots, you remember sleeping out his front walkway, had been exposed to some of this. As a matter of fact, the Kyroots mentioned fallout, working in with Pompeii and Vesuvius. He said that he felt a lot better now that he could forget his ancestors. The point is, with history, other than it being a hobby, it's only ordinary people, as they're supposed to, that take history seriously. And by history, those of you that now have a fairly decent set of intellectual armor and shin guards, you got to face up to it. You should have just as close a relationship with your parents, blah, 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 as possible. But anyone who thinks that history means anything is not a revolutionist. Anyone, that was the point of the 7 rules of the revolutionist that was read one night. You remember all the things about a revolutionist is humble, a revolutionist is thrifty, a revolutionist loves and identifies himself with his family and his nation and his religion. Anything past, if you're thinking about that kind of horizontal line I used to draw and put that right now and where you are is like a vertical line, and this seems to be the sequence, this seems to be the flow of time, this seems to be the progress, the march of humanity. Anything right past this is meaningless. It exists and it doesn't exist, if you want it that way. Not to ordinary people it exists. And as you know, it's not an attack on anything, much less psychology, but consider. Contemporary times could not exist without some combination now in the secondary world, without some combination of religion/psychology. It's according to sort of where you fall within that kind of generational movement. But nowadays, psychology has kind of more or less replaced religion with many people. But it's all the same thing. That is, well, what I am today is a result of what has gone before. Religious people think what's gone before is the transgressions, the fox passes of my forefathers. And that's back before they knew how to pronounce the term correctly. Or psychologically, what I am now is the result of the traumatic experiences I suffered at the hands, whether they intended it or not, because my parents did not have many parenting skills. My father could hardly change his own clothes. So here I am. You remember a man pointed out in another Kyroot that he had concluded that being alive was being in recovery. But see, it's everybody else. It's a hobby. Them saying, well, what I am is, because of that. That's true and it's not true. It exists and it doesn't exist. They just have, from an immediate personal view, the revolutionist view, they just have it all just a little bit off, see. They say, I am what I am as a result of what's happened. All right, that's okay. Up to then. If they hadn't said anything, it'd been all right. But now if they said something, and if you say, well, like what? Then they begin to get anecdotal. They won't simply refer to, I am what I am now as a result of all those things that happen in the nucleus of certain cells. No, they start about Adam, the Greeks, my father, my mother, the people I grew up with, they will not leave well enough alone. They will not say, I am what I am now, because of being dragged through that goo field. So, back to, I guess, the last one. The true impact of historical events is always after the fact, in that what occurred was collective and generational and not immediate and individual. That is, to ordinary people, if you're part of the collective thinking of humanity, what has gone before is of importance. None of you, I assume, would be foolish enough if in some reason you find yourself at a convention in the midst of ordinary people and they were saying, well, what we are is not just a result of things that happened 6,000 years ago. We're still paying some of the price for that, but my God, we are a result of what happened, of having, whatever it is now, 3 terms of Republicans in the White House. All right? That's true. You'd be in it say, no, you're not. Because they'll say, huh? They got statistics. They've got anecdotes up their sleeve and their pants. They're everywhere. You just have to kick them away to show that historical events have brought us to where we are right now. Their impact is always after the fact. No one can see from an ordinary level what so-called history, the flow of events, current events. Nobody can say what the effect is now. That's why it's fun to run with the dead. That's why the dead are so popular. That's why history is so popular. Well, I don't want to fool around here with current events. Give me a few hours until this thing is history. That's, of course, not the way they put it. Important men with suits and ties working for the Washington Post or whoever, they say, well, very interesting. What we just heard, the report that just came in from Pakistan. Give me a few minutes to ponder this. Like, I've got to analyze it. I've got to consider what has happened now. If we're going to consider that there is, as surprising as it may seem, a more direct push of fundamentalist Islamic beliefs getting into Pakistan, which surprises many of us. And the army did not put up an immediate, give me a few minutes. I may go back. The political expert, the Middle Eastern expert for the paper, give me a few minutes. He goes back in his office. It may only take a few minutes, 30 minutes. He may come out with a column analyzing it. But then it's history. Seriously. It is not current events anymore. Because the ordinary mind cannot conceive of what current events are. It cannot conceive of the impact. If you ask somebody suddenly, whatever's going on, if it seemed to be some experience of some consequence, that the person seemed to passionately... Well, somebody finds out that a good friend just died, or that your business just burnt down. And reported, this happens. Nobody pays any attention. They can explain it away. And somebody rushes up. We understand that all of your family just died in a plane crash. How do you feel? Of course, you can say the person's in shock. They don't know how they feel. It has to become a historical event. It has to be after the fact to be of any consequence. And then from a revolutionist view, it is of no consequence after that. Because the only way it's of consequence is when it's part of the mainstream, the mechanical stream and flow of one generation to another, even if it only takes 30 minutes. That's still generational. It's still part of the collective. It's only then that's of any consequence. But then from a more complex revolutionist view, what I was trying to say, it's of no consequence because it's no longer immediate and it's certainly not individual. Are we completely out?
No.
Well, still back to the... Should I not be going any further because of TV time and stuff?
You can continue. We can work it out.
Well, that's better. I guess well, all right. I guess that's the end of the amateur time, so if you'll call our 900 number and call the one with the even number digit at the end, if you vote for me, and if you don't vote for me, don't bother to call. Good night.